Scott Arizala is one of the greatest staff trainers I have ever learned from. He's a master teacher, able to translate big concepts with humor, realism, and storytelling. You've seen him at ACA National. You've seen him at Tri-State. If you're lucky and crazy, you may have even seen him at your camp. And if you've never experienced Scott, you're in for a real treat. Damn, Scott, you better live up to this grand intro. This is the Day Camp Pod. Welcome back to the Day Camp Pod. This is Andy Pritikin, Director of Liberty Lake in the Philly Burbs of New Jersey.
This is Sam Thompson from Crystal Lake Park District, Crystal Lake, Illinois.
And I'm Tiffany Yvonne, the owner of Purposeful Play in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
All right. So before we get started with our guests, I just want to catch up. Tiffany, Yvonne, how you doing? What's been going on? I follow your social media. I saw you all dressed up on an awesome morning show. You killed it. It was so cute and great. Like, what's it been? How's it been going in the new consulting career?
It's going well. It's going well. You know what's so funny is it's the same. It's just like camp. All I'm doing is just like building morale, creating empathy, sparking joy, right, for adults. And we really needed it more than the kids, especially since we're responsible for raising the kids. So it was an unexpected pivot, but it's been amazing.
Oh, that's really awesome. And how the kids doing?
The kids are good.
Excellent.
Everybody's good.
Excellent. And then how grandma, if I see any more pictures of those adorable little grandkids, you just makes me melt.
The best was all of them crying at one time at the Christmas picture. That was pretty fun.
That was phenomenal. I agree.
Trying to get away.
So you know, Sam represents the municipal wing of the Day Camp Pod, and Sam is currently recording this podcast in a van during a field trip. Okay. So for all my rec people out there, they're like, yeah, that's right. That's what we do, right? We do after school programs, we do this, we do that, and then we roll it into camp. So it's pretty awesome, Sam.
One time I didn't have to load the buses. They're on their own. But if you see someone pounding on my car window, you know it's not going well.
Just keep your finger on the mute button, right? Although it could be funny. The pound could be funny. All right. So we have with us my friend Scott Arizala. Scott, we had you, we gave you a taste of Scott Arizala about, I don't know, 4 years ago before the world ended. The Day Camp Pod, we were recording live at Tri-State, and Scott was great. We just sort of grabbed him in, threw him in his seat and threw some headphones on, and it was terrific. And I honestly found out there, like, the depth of your day camp experience, because I always knew you as like a Frost Valley guy. You were part of that lineage of crazy Frost Valley camp people, you know, but you were really a day camp guy. So can you just give everybody a little synopsis of that your little brief history kind of thing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, day camps were always sort of part of my past, right? Because I grew up in Ann Arbor going to the Ann Arbor YMCA, and so my parents sent me to day camp, you know, just like everybody else, at probably 3 or 4. The day camp here is unlike a lot of, I think, YMCA, particularly YMCA day camps, where instead of just sort of programs in the building, they actually had a physical day camp site. So I feel like I got kind of that flavor of day camps from the get. And then I, you know, got involved in the overnight camp here in Ann Arbor, and you know, I was that kid who fell in love with it straight away. You know, both the day camp experience and the overnight camp experience. As early as 6 or 7, I remember calling from the overnight camp, calling home and saying, hey, you know, they've got room in the next session. Can I stay? You know, and then by the time I was probably 8 or 9, I was, you know, working the paper out and doing all the things I needed to do to make sure that I could just spend the whole summer up at camp. And then once I moved into professionally, you know, what was going on actually right before what Andy called my crazy Frost Valley experience. I'm not sure my fellow Frost Valley alumni would appreciate that as much. Listen,
as long as Matt Busak's considered part of that, like, it is what it is.
You're all on the same boat at one point, right? Anyway,
if you were in a boat with that guy.
I'll tell you about Busak though. That first summer I was at Frost Valley was his probably, I don't know, he had been coming for a while. He was a little bit older of an international staff. He was that kind of mid to early 20s versus, you know, kind of, you know, the 19s and 20s that we always get. And he was one of these like all hands kind of person. Like we didn't want to, they didn't want to put him into a particular position. And up
Did
on
they
the
want to
big
keep him away from
staffing
children?
board,
Did they want to keep him away from
no,
children?
they wanted
No? All right.
no, that's not what they wanted to make sure he was sort of everywhere. And we had one role that was called the chicken packer, which was supposed to be, prior to my time, was supposed to be the person who really helped deal with all the overnights that kids were taking. So they were the ones that were doing all the prep and everything. And he was on the board when I walked in. This is maybe my first day at Frost Valley. I see this guy's name, Matt Buchek, and his title was the assistant chicken packer. And so from that moment on, I knew I was gonna like Matt Buchek. Anyways, prior to that experience, I was living in Ithaca, New York, and I got a job in what we would all call Parks and Rec. They called it their youth bureau, running their day camp programs out of the city of Ithaca. So that's kind of where I sort of cut my teeth on what I would call my actual sort of professional day camp experience. And it was a wild ride because, as you know, lots of folks know who work in that kind of Parks and Rec space, it's not always set up as camp. And I came in with this sort of more traditional camp background, and I wanted to create camp. And then they of course, you know, sat me down in a ice rink, outdoor ice rink during the summer, which is clearly not an ice rink, and said, you know, here's your camp, sort of go. And that
I love it.
you know, and that was my day camp experience for almost 3 summers. I ended up getting that Frost Valley job in the spring of the summer, going to what would have been my 3rd year at that camp. So anyways, I've had a nice mix of experience there. And then of course, through Frost Valley and some of the other experiences I've had, we've had a lot of day camps running sort of alongside of the more traditional overnight camps that I was doing, whether that's traditional meaning just overnight camp experiences for kids, or traditional overnight camp for kids with different kinds of special or medical needs. So it's been kind of a wild mix of experiences in my past. And then of course, working with all of you folks. Yeah, working with all of you folks in conferences or at camps doing training and whatnot.
And you know, like, because I just turned 56, and it's like, you know, I've been doing this for a while. And I remember when Scott came in and started doing sessions, and he was this cool young guy, you know, with like cool insight. So you had like, you know, Michael Brandwein doing his thing, you know, and he's still doing it, really hasn't changed much, you know. And then you had like this young buck, you know, up there telling like wacky stories.
I'm still a young buck, baby. That's still me.
But this is my point, is that now he's got kids, right? Like he's like seasoned, you know. And I heard him on the podcast with Jack, with the Summer Camp Society folks, which I love those things. I love Jack. And you know, all of a sudden he was the old guy in the conversation, and he was like the wise guy, and he was sort of trying to temper the like unbridled optimism and sometimes pessimism of the young bucks. And I was like, look at Scotty go. He's like,
sounds interesting. Yeah, man. Doesn't having your own kids do a world of difference for some of your opinions on what people should be doing with kids, you know?
Yeah.
So I found that interesting. And one person on that podcast with us was somebody who came up with me, was a kid, was a camper at my camp, was a unit leader for me, was a seasonal director for me. So it was really fun to be on that particular podcast with Nelson Strickland, who again sort of came up with me, and now seeing him out there doing his thing is
you're
cool.
You're officially a camp tweener now, Scott.
There you go.
I'll give you that. I'm not gonna call you part of the establishment yet. So there was a question before we got on that I was like, save it for the podcast. It was like, what have you been doing the last few years? Because COVID hit and like everybody went, you know, hiding in their basements and stuff like that. And we have not seen the full reemergence yet of Scott.
No, and you know, truth be told, you may not actually, as far as getting back to sort of where I was in 2018, 2019, not because I've any lost love for camp, because, you know, like almost all of us had to do at some point during the pandemic process, right? Like I had to pivot into things that were A, obviously going to pay bills and stuff, but B, I was trying to find a space where, you know, I could use some of my talents, my ideas, and find some inspiration. And you know, that spring was rough on everybody. And I remember, you know, I had probably more work, more emails, more phone calls than I think I've ever had in my life as a consultant at summer camp. But of course the money wasn't there. You know, the money had just dried up because, you know, everyone was closing their camps for the season, or trying to go virtual, or, you know, slimming it way down and only, you know, having a, you know, a certain amount of kids. And everyone wanted, you know, that's when you call a consultant, right? It's like, how do we do this? You're the expert, tell me. And of course, you know, it was brand new for all of us, and I didn't necessarily know what to do. And so I would find myself being, frankly, I kind of was more of a like grief counselor and cheerleader during that spring and summer than I was a camp consultant, right? Because I was really trying to help people through the decision-making process where they were. And it was, if y'all remember that spring and summer, it was also so regional that, like, hey, what we're doing here in Michigan, it looks nothing like what y'all are doing in New Jersey versus
Or
what y'all are
Florida
doing
for
in
sure.
Georgia
Yeah.
or Florida, wherever, right? And so I wasn't able to just say, well, hey, you know, these 10 camps are doing it like this. Why don't you just do it like that? Because the details got so crazy. So it got pretty clear that towards the end of that summer that I needed to shift gears a little bit. Again, just to keep myself working and busy and feeling good about what I was doing. And there wasn't a lot of, you know, there wasn't a lot for me as a camp consultant and trainer. And frankly, you know, I didn't want to be a drag on people's budgets. And as camp people, you all know that those budgets drive a lot of what's going on. And, you know, for me to come in, that was it's a big ticket item. And so I had a hard time sort of squaring that in my own head, because I just know, having run camps myself and having, you know, tried to balance those things to the penny, you know, I never wanted to put a camp director in the position of being like, yo, I can get 2 canoes or I can have you come. You know, it's like, well, you kind of need canoes, man. So like, you know, and so I was answering the phone a lot, and I was answering those emails because, you know, y'all are my friends, whether I recognize your name or not. When I get a camp, you know, when I get an email and it's so-and-so at whatever camp.com or .org, I answer it because these are my people, right? Like you know, this is my passion. So, but I found myself doing a ton of work, and still needing to turn around and figure out how I was going to get some money coming in. So I had switched gears a little bit, without getting too in depth about what I'm doing now. My sort of main gig now is I'm running a foundation with my family, you know, where we're trying to do cash grants for people in need. So that's the sort of short version of it. You know, my dad, you know, so we don't have a lot of money, but we sort of know how to make money from the little money that we have. We know how to grow the pot. And so my dad, come the sort of fall, winter of that year, going into 2021, basically said, hey, you know, let's try to figure out a way we can give away what money we have. And so for anybody who knows me, you know, my first response was like, where do I sign up? Like, yeah, that sounds great. So that's what I've been spending a lot of my time on, just doing that. And then, of course, as the last season and this season sort of, as camp as a whole kind of came back into a sort of a more quote unquote normal space, I've been doing more and more back with camps. But, you know, I'm a passionate guy, and I've been throwing all my energy and dumping it all into this. So I have a hard time saying to myself, all right, well, let's, like, you know, stop cold over here and kind of pick back up over here. I've been trying to do a
different
little
chapters.
bit of
You got different chapters of life, and you're in this one right now, and who knows what the next one's going to be. So that's all good.
Exactly.
And how old are your kids now?
8th grade, 5th grade, and 3rd grade. So I got a 13, almost 14. I got a 10, almost 11, and I got a 9-year-old. So like, I've never
you
felt
are a camp
more like
director.
I have been a camp director through and through for the last 2 years. I literally, I wish I could show you guys. Maybe I'll turn my computer on and show you at some point. But basically, that pandemic spring, that you know, I had zero work, you know, other than the free work that I was doing answering the phone. I made a treehouse for my kids, and I actually made it out of all the old wood out of the camp that I grew up at. They were taking down the cabins that at the end of that summer of 2019. So I went up there right at the end of the summer after all the kids and families had left, and I cut a bunch of wood out of all the old cabins with all the names and everything on it. And then over the course of that few months during the pandemic, I made a treehouse that actually kind of looks like one of the cabins from my old camp. So that kicked off 2 years of straight up camp directing in my house. I mean, even the year of virtual school, we ended up potting up with 4 other families. And so we had about 8 kids over here, of course, because I couldn't let it go. Had to be in my living room, and I hired a camp counselor from my old camp who came over, and I was like, it's cool if you make sure they get their homework done or whatever, or stay, you know, keep their camera on Zoom or whatever. But what I really want from you is all the in-between moments where the kids need to have somebody paying attention and somebody interested in what was going on with them, and getting them to all sit together at lunch and talk to each other and hang out and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's been a day camp experience over here in my house for quite some time.
What I love most about what you shared is just the true, I don't even know what the word I'm thinking of, but like the true, I guess the fact that what our old experiences are not really old, like they'll always get blended into whatever we're doing that's new. It was one thing when I was pivoting, I was like, you're starting over again. And it's like, you're actually not ever really starting over, you're starting from experience. And so just to, you know, like the treehouse in the backyard, having the pod, and knowing, you know, parents were going crazy looking for pods where their kids could be safe,
Yep.
wouldn't lose socialization. So just to create that in your own front room, right, just goes to show you that no matter how far we get away from it, like camp will always be, once you've been a camp professional, it'll always be a part of your work. So
yeah, 100%.
Really,
I mean, it's even part of my parenting. I mean, I'm sure for the other parents listening on this, you know, it's like, it's so true where, you know, I mean, even my son, my middle son, the fifth grader right now, you know, he's basically me. So if that gives anybody any idea about what the kind of problems he gives the teachers, you know, I've heard more in the last, you know, 2 years about how he needs to use his power for good. If you all know, he's like that kind of kid, right? And so, you know, just even talking to him, like I can hear conversations that I've had with actual kids, and I can hear coaching that I've done with staff about working with I keep saying actual kids. My son is actually, he's a real kid. But you know, the point is that, like, you're so right, Tiffany. It's like you just sort of pull it all in, and whether that's again parenting or your profession or whatever, it's like I'm finding every single day that I absolutely use all the skills that I sort of honed during my camp time, just in everyday life, you know, certainly in my profession and my work, as well as in my parenting.
Awesome. So the first question I'm going to ask you before I talk about my friends at CRS, Commercial Recreation Specialists, is about the trends that you're seeing and the emails you've been getting and the cries for help and stuff like that. All right. But first, I got to tell you all about CRS and their emergency alert system that I use at my camp, which is actually pretty darn cool because I do not have a big giant Scott Arizala, please report to the office kind of system. I'm on 60 acres. It would cost a lot. The logistics are hard. So I have this emergency alert system, which it basically just shoots out in different directions. There's 3 different sounds you use. So one is for a lost camper drill, one is for a scatter drill, one's to everybody come back, everything's fine sound and stuff like that. And it works really, really well. And it's economical and it's loud, which is what really counts. And you could always throw that in there with their lightning detection system too, because we all do know that, you know, the weather patterns are crazy these days. So anyway, it's commercial.
Well, actually, Andy, can I say one thing about that before you go on? You know what I love about what you just said is that I've actually, this isn't how I was going to answer your question about emerging trends and whatever, but one of the things that I find crazy that I dig into just about every camp director about is anytime I've ever looked at an emergency procedure, right? The written emergency procedure, there's always like 15 steps or whatever, right? And it's like, all right, I get that. Like, you got to do all these things for sure. How do you teach all your young people what happens when, to your point, Andy, there's a missing camper, there's a scatter situation, there's an all clear sign? Like, how do you do that, right? And often I hear, 99% of the time I hear, well, we get this out, we literally go through it, we expect them emergency procedures, we expect them to know the emergency procedures, all of that. So we go through it and then we run drills and stuff. And I'm always like, man, that's a lot of brain space you're taking up. How about this? Can we just have a signal, you know, a sound, or everybody has a radio? So maybe there's a thing that, you know,
code blue, code red,
code that comes over, whatever.
Right.
And how about, can we teach all these 19-year-olds, like, there's 1, 2, maybe 3 things that you have to remember when you hear the big sound ending at your camp, this kind of signal. And then you go to the wherever, you bring your kids to the wherever, you scatter off into the woods, whatever it is, the first thing you have to remember. And then we'll tell you from there what to do next. Because what every camp director I know does is they go get the emergency procedure thing off the shelf in the office or wherever, and they're methodically going through it one step at a time. We're not even the professionals. The people who wrote the procedures aren't even the ones who are like walking or just remember all 15 steps and I'm going to hit them methodically. No, we sit down with our things and we go through it. So a system like that, I think, has a lot of benefit, because what we do is we minimize the things that we're expecting young people to know and remember and recall in an instant, and frankly, in a very stressful incident. Because when you hear that signal that there's a missing camper, I don't care if you're the 16-year-old CAT or the 56-year-old camp director, or however old you said you are, or anybody in between, it's stressful, right? You're worried, and none of us bring our A game
and
when we're
you're
stressed
not,
out.
your brain's not shooting right. You know, you go into fight or flight mode.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Exactly.
I don't even think people are grabbing that dusty old clipboard that's hanging on the wall in that. I don't even think they're doing that. Like, because you're in crisis mode at that point and you're just doing what you think is best. So yeah, no, I think that emergency procedures are a place that that camps definitely need to work out.
So big plug for whoever the organization that you just talked about. Sorry,
CRS4rec.com. CRS is serious about fun and about safety. All right.
Sweet.
So anyway,
sweet.
So yeah, so let's, moving forward out of the, I loved your description of the grief counselor or cheerleader thing, right? During that time, I mean, Sam will tell you, we were doing podcasts, like we were in just like full cheerleader mode. Like that was it.
Yeah.
We were like, we were, all right, if you're off the ship and going on the grief boat, that's fine. But we're going to stay with the cheerleader boat because we had to keep it going.
Well, even some of those camps that decide, hey, we got to shut down, but we're going to try some online programming. We're going to try to keep some way to keep in touch with our kids over the summer, whatever it might be. Even those folks needed a bit of like, you can do it. And especially those folks who tried to do any kind of online programming, they also needed like, of course it doesn't feel like camp. Of course, this feels all backwards and weird and wrong.
Right.
It's July 1st. You're not doing what you're supposed to be doing on July 1st, and sort of needed some of that pump up and some of that, like, you're making the right decisions with the cards you've been played.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. But I don't even want to talk about it anymore. Just, it gives me PTSD. So, so let's fast forward 2 years. Okay. And we had, I don't know if you talked to any camp friends in summer 2021, but there was a reckoning with staff. Right?
There was that I think lasted kind of into 2022, not only from the professional level of, it's just hard to find them now. It's hard, I think there's a whole class of young people that haven't been coming to camp the last 3 summers, because they're the young people that didn't grow up there. So they don't have that experience. Maybe went to 1 or 2 or whatever. But the reason why those folks come is because they got some buddy or some girlfriend or whatever at college that's like, yo, this would be so fun if you came and did this. All of our young people, they got a million friends, but hopefully we've trained them the right way, because they're only going to ask the 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 that they know would actually do a good job. Because they're like, yo, if you come to camp, like, I need you to be a good camp counselor, because it's like makes my job harder if you're not good at your job. And so they're going to have a handful of those folks come. But I think those folks didn't come these last few years because, well, it's like, look, man, I've been locked up for the last, I don't know, 2 years. I don't want to go in the woods and get locked up. You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't sound fun to me. So they were off doing other things,
Well, and by the way, some of those things could include sitting in your room right there and working on your computer and making money, as opposed to being outside sweating and getting bitten by mosquitoes and wiping noses and stuff like that.
And none of the other pressures changed, right? None of the internship pressures, parent pressures, university pressures, all these things that sort of come to bear on summer camp employment. None of those things actually changed, really. I mean, those were all still present. And so I think, we're missing that whole class. I think that's one of the big pressures that have been on staffing. And that's the thing that I think coming out of this past summer, I heard the most was, I think in 2021 and 2022, we really focused in on kids and families and sort of what they were missing from that pandemic experience and how we could sort of bring them back into the fold safely and feeling good about it in a healthy way and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's really great. I think we may have even thought a little bit about that staff, right? Where we were saying to ourselves, hey, this group of young staff maybe missed their CIT summer or some of those development years. One of the things I heard coming out of this summer, which I thought was really interesting, was some of our young leaders, you know, those seasonal folks still, maybe not hit our year-round team yet, but maybe the just post-college, you know, they've been a unit leader or whatever, that middle management at your campus called for a couple seasons, and now you bringing them in as an assistant director or program director, whatever kind of maybe next step, but still seasonal. I heard a lot about that particular group this summer, about how basically some of the same complaints. They were sort of falling off really quickly. You know, burnout came at week 3 and 4 instead of our usual week 5 and 6. I think a lot of young people were coming in to the office with a lot of the ways to say things that got us all sort of on a high alert. I'm struggling with my mental health. I need to create some space for myself, but not with a lot of sort of skills underneath it. A lot of camp directors explained to me, it felt a lot like I'm sort of dropping this big thing on your plate and sort of expecting now you to do something about it. And my only suggestion is, I'm feeling really burnt out. I'm feeling like I can't do this. I'm feeling like my mental health is suffering. So I need 2 weeks off, or just some sort of really unreasonable sort of solution to that problem. And I felt like we were missing the mark. And so one of the things that I've been talking to a lot of camp directors about is, I think we need to, and I'm going to say it to you folks, and then I'm going to sort of clarify what I mean, because I think we need to kind of go back to the basics when it comes to a lot of our training, particularly our leadership training. And the reason why I don't like saying that, because I don't want to sound condescending. I don't want it to sound to a bunch of young people like it's like remediation in some kind of way, because it's not. It's like, I think we need to get back to what like makes the summer camp experience what it always has been for kids and for families and for staff and for us as leaders, and for our young leaders that we're bringing into that. I think we missed a bunch of development, and we sort of in this last summer kind of took that for granted, didn't realize some of the development that particular group might have missed, and it came out in these ways that were untenable, any kind of work environment, but particularly at camp, where it's like all hands on deck kind of all the time.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think you articulated that pretty well. I mean, because you think about it, right? It's basically 3 crazy years, right? And 1 year that most everybody was not even there, right? And these are times that camps were operating in like a pseudo crisis mode. We just want to make sure, Scott, that you don't get COVID. Like that was all we were concerned about, because we don't need you missing a week or 2, you know, or giving it to everybody else in your group kind of thing. So that became the priority. And now, and so 2 or 3 years of like whatever. Plus, by the way, even you could say years before that, where a lot of staff training, whether it was for your frontline people, your middle management people, we were tweaking things at high levels, you know, and DEI and this and all that kind of stuff, like all these things that are super important, but they weren't the cake. They were more the icing a little bit. And I am saying the same exact thing, that it's back to basics now, that we cannot assume that these counselors are coming in with any basic, knowledge, tools, whatever. We have to teach them, right? And that's totally transfers over to your middle management people, about them being able to have those basics of being able to manage those people. I just decided that at my first leadership meeting I'm going to have with like my 30 top people, and I'm a day camp, I can do it in the off season, of course, right? It's going to be about giving and receiving feedback with a professional speaker that does this, an HR person, right? Because like that's the huge part of their job. And these school teachers aren't really equipped for this. And I can't just assume that just because they've been at camp for 10 years that they know how to do that, right? And then we're looking at staff orientation, and we're like, what are the nuts and bolts of taking care of children? Of teaching them to behave, discipline, like all those kind of things. Like, okay, great, we did DEI last year. It was, we made major steps with it. It was important. But now we got to focus on like taking care of children.
Yeah, I got to tell you, Andy, 2/3 camps I was at last summer, physically there to do some training. The amount of like additional titles I was sort of told about just in informal conversations with counselors, right? I'm like, oh, what's your name? What do you do? Well, I'm a counselor this. Oh, and I'm the inclusion specialist, or I'm a this, I'm a that, and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, all right, well, explain that to me. And I'd get the little thing, and I'm like, yeah, but do you know how to like listen to kids? You know, like,
Mm.
do you know how to let's play, well, like play a game, like let's like, how do you make the 15 minutes before lunch after second hour like fun and not just all right, everyone sitting around, like it was those kind of conversations that I kept having where, oh yeah, I can talk to you all about my, uh, the program specialist position that I'm also doing, where I'm trying to coordinate the curriculum of these 3 different classes so that there's a sort of a values driven piece between all 3 of them. But like the minute that I ask a question like, but do you know all the kids' names? They're like, well, no.
It's only 1 week.
You know what I mean?
It's only been a
Yeah.
week.
So yeah. So the point is that like I think we do need to sort of refocus a little bit on what some of those things are, so that, because I totally agree with you, Andy, like the sort of icing is an important part of the cake experience, right? If not, it's just sort of like a little bit dry and kind of, so the
Not
icing is
exciting.
important,
Yeah.
right? But it can't all be icing, or it's just like way too sweet and sugary of a cake, like we got to have the cake part really good, like, and then you can put some icing on it and then it's all good. So anyway,
I'm trying to get my intermediate staff to be more, to feel more like their counselors are their kids, that they're supporting more, because they got lost in the minutia of the paperwork and schedules and whatnot, and forgot that their counselors are actually who they're supposed to be taking care of, and being there for that minute to give them a suggestion when it's happening instead of trying to do it later.
Yep. That's fascinating that you bring that up, because Andy, you just said you want to have your, sort of main leadership group talk about giving and receiving feedback. I imagine there's going to be some sort of conflict when we disagree with the feedback. Like, how do you talk about that kind of stuff? I bet if you take any one of those people, Andy, and you said, all right, well, what would this sound like if you were talking to a 12-year-old versus like your 30 whatever colleague, they would pretty quickly be able to pick it up and say some smart things and feel like they're kind of on the right page and all that. And Sam, to your point, like that's part of one of the ways that I like to talk about leadership and leadership ideas at camp. It's like, well, you're really good at this because you've just been doing it with like 10-year-olds for the past 5 years. Now I just gave you a bunch of adults, and I was like, so do it with the adults. And yeah, we got to change the words. I'm not saying we should talk to a teenager or a young person in the same sort of way that we would talk to an 8 or 9-year-old,
but vice versa.
Vice versa. But what's underneath it is a lot of the same principles. And again, if we can kind of go back to the basics of what makes those conversations good for kids, productive for both kids and adults, kind of effective for the group as a whole, I think we can learn a lot as far as what we're doing with the adults and what folks like Tiffany and I do with the sort of older adults. I don't mean to put y'all in a box, but like the professionals in the space is a lot of the same kind of thing. Like when we're talking, if I'm ever back at Tri-State and I'm standing in front of everybody saying a bunch of stuff, I'm just saying it to y'all, but it's the same idea if I was saying it at a camp, or if I was saying it to like my kids upstairs, or if I was saying it to my kids at camp. I mean, I just sort of use some different words. I mean, I'm making it way more simplistic than I think it is, but I think the principles are true. And that also gives people a dose of confidence too. If you're having a leadership training of some kind and you're like, you all are really good at this. I want you to know that you're so good at this. Spend my money on like an HR professional to come in here and talk about actual techniques to giving and receiving feedback, so that you can take your skills and put them into practice in like a really meaningful, powerful way, where we actually get some behavior change when we're trying to deliver more critical feedback, or where we can kind of get more of the same when we're delivering really sort of positive feedback to somebody.
I love everything about that. What's so funny is I was saying this to someone the other day that we assume just because people grew taller, got facial hair, and had a birthday, that they're like responsible, right? Like that's all that happened. Like we just adulting. It's just that we grew, like something physically changed on our bodies and time passed. It doesn't mean anything about the skills that we gained, or did we overcome any of, we talked about trauma before we got on here, like any of the, the internal things that people are facing, or the inner critic, or none of that happened just because people became adults. And a lot of this conversation is when I work with organizations around like how you'll have like the older, right? I feel happy to be like in the middle. Can't call me old, can't call me young. It's so funny. But when you have the older people who are just like these millennials, and it's just like, well, what are you taking into account of who they are and how they were raised? And you can't expect them to be something to these kids that you're not willing to be to them. And realizing that lack of empathy and compassion, the only justification you have that is that they're grown. That just means they got taller and grew facial, like nothing really changed. And so it's really important to recognize that these are like human dynamics. The whole point of camp is like social emotional intelligence is the curriculum of camp. The whole point of camp is that we want to build better people, right? Help people who become better people. Well, we're all people. It doesn't matter if you're 8, you're 3, you're 88. Like at the end of the day, we all need the same things. And so I love that approach to saying like, we all need encouragement. We all need to know what we're good at and how to get even better, and just really, the last thing I'll say on that is that I think one of the things that owners of camps really need to think about is not just like, how can we get better training for our staff so they'll be more engaged, but really like bringing someone in to help them develop their own coaching skills, like leaders as coaches, because then that way you are equipped, not when it's just a Scott or Tiffany or whatever other expert that can come in, but you're equipped with the skills to coach your people up. So you're just not like, what the heck,
Yeah. Well, and I think attached to that, and this is another thing that I kept hearing out of this past summer, is that I think that we're just doing too much. There's too much, like we spent 10 years prior to the pandemic.
Listen, pause on that, because that is literally where I was going to go next. Okay. Is that because that's part of the back to the basics thing. We're going to hit on that in a second.
Yeah.
But first, I got to tell you, Scott, when you were doing your day camp world director thing, did you ever do the programming thing where you had to program hundreds of kids at a time? I mean, and what did it look like? Was it on actual giant pieces of paper? Was it in Excel spreadsheets? Right.
It's on giant piece of paper with Post-its.
Right.
And
so
right.
And if I told you, like, right, if I called you, right, and says, God, I'll pay you $1,500. Come over to my place. I need you to, right. You'd probably be like twitching a little bit and not necessarily be so eager to do it, because it's a real pain in the butt. And it's a giant math problem, right? And it's really easy to make mistakes, right? And scheduling affects every camper and every staff summer, right? So guess what, dude? It's time to make it easier, okay? And that's why we got this company called Camptivities. That is one of our proud sponsors, and they help create a balanced and engaging schedule without the mistakes and without those long days and long nights. I remember my first experience as a day camp director. I think I was up until 3 a.m. before the first day of camp, literally handwriting.
And you screwed it up, didn't you?
I don't know how I could not have screwed it up, but I don't know. That was the least of my problems on that first day. The big problem on that first day is that when we couldn't find little Johnny Wiedemeyer to get on the bus, and we looked all over the camp, and we looked at the bottom of the pool, and we looked in the woods, and we looked in all the bathrooms, and we could not find Johnny. And we sent the buses after 20 minutes of having them, spew diesel exhaust into everybody's face. And I was about to have a nervous breakdown. And the division leader called Johnny's mom, and Johnny's mom said, "Thanks for calling. He feels a lot better. He'll be in camp tomorrow." So that's what I remember most about my first day as a day camp director, which I love telling that story to my new leadership people and my bus captains who didn't take good attendance and all. But anyway, back to my friends' Camptivities, auto scheduling, group scheduling, rainy day scheduling, ladies and gentlemen, manual adjustments, customized settings, so much more. If you're looking for a better way to schedule the summer, go to camptivities.com. Okay. Made by day camp people for day camp people. All right. Camptivities.com. All right.
Yeah,
So anyway,
I have to say, Andy, nobody pounded on my window and my buses are gone. So
look at that.
yay.
Look at that. Awesome.
Perfect.
So
that means we got them all, right?
so so the final bit, so this leads into what we're talking about. We're talking about back to the basics training. Okay. Not taking anything for granted. And then, yeah, that to me is the COVID silver linings of the pandemic, right? Is that everybody realized that we weren't doing too much. And that, you know, I always said on my first day of staff training for my new staff who don't really know what's going on, I say, you guys, I could run a camp, okay, with me and Scott over here and a red ball in my backyard with 20 kids, and they will have the greatest camp experience of their life because it's about the people. And it's about what happens and the relationships and all that kind of thing. It is not about the bells and whistles. And the pandemic forced camps to pare it down, right? And then all of a sudden they're like, wow, this is great. And then we on the day camp pod were like, hey, before you pivot back to what you were doing, think about this first, okay?
Yep.
Because nobody's expecting you to necessarily go back to the way it was, and the ones that were, screw them. Right? Because those are people that just were eating too much candy. And now we sort of went on a candy diet and, you know, and now we're doing the real thing. So, so that's absolutely what happened in my camp and what I'm seeing at others. And because I think what sort of forced the hand of that was that staff reckoning thing too, where all of a sudden the job just became too hard as is anyway. So we sort of had to reduce the amount of stress onto these people anyhow. And it sort of has worked. So, yeah. I mean,
and I think we've conflated like pace and busyness, right? Like we can stay busy and we can keep kids engaged, and we don't have to run at this crazy breakneck pace where it's you know, it's sort of like feeling to staff like things are coming down faster than they can pick them up, you know? And I think that was one of the feelings. I think you're exactly right. How can we like just slow it down enough that kids are having a great time, kids are feeling really fulfilled, kids are engaged, and we all know that that's really different from kid to kid. Some kid just needs to have their book and 30 minutes of nobody talking to them, and another kid needs absolutely to be going each minute of the day, and there's all kinds of kids in between. And I just think that we need to be able to create a little bit more space for that, which will bring some of that stress level down, I think, for staff, and keep the kids, you know, sort of engaged at the same time. I think we were just sort of doing too much. And I think that was hitting its peak right prior to the pandemic. If you all remember, coming out of 2018 and 2019, staff mental health was probably the biggest sort of buzzy kind of concern coming out of those. And I think maybe with camper mental health. And we were sort of hitting this like, well, so now what do we do? Like we're hitting this space where staff are really having some breakdowns and things at camp that we can't handle. And we were veering into, and I think this is totally acceptable, but we were veering into things like, well, should we just hire some social workers or some professional mental health professionals, you know, some mental health professionals to be at our camps and things like that. I think that's an absolutely fine resource to have at camps.
Yeah,
I'm not
if you
trying
can
to
afford it,
diss
God
that.
bless you.
If you can afford that, that's great. And not all of us are in that space, but I think one of the things that we can do is try to take things literally off of their plate to say, we don't need you to be worried about all these things. We just want you to be thinking about and doing, you know, these sort of core things. And again, that fits in a little differently to everybody's camp culture and sort of what your schedule looks like to the Camptivities idea, as far as like, well, where are everybody and what are they doing and so on and so forth. But I also think it has some really simple applications or some practical ideas like, are there sort of enough choices at an individual activity for every kid to feel like a little bit of ownership around what's going on? You know, now I'm not saying that it got to be crazy and you got to go to arts and crafts and there's got to be 15 different projects you can do. But how about like today's project? And at my camp, we always used to call it junk box, which is we just get out kind of art supplies and you can just kind of create. That can be a different idea that you could do, or it's always okay to like just kind of kick it and hang out at arts and crafts. You don't have to make anything if you don't want. But if we can kind of think about some of those ideas within the activities. I think it can help slow it down a little bit and help kids feel a little bit more empowered around what's going on and take ownership around some of those ideas. And not to mention they're looking at the birdhouse like, I can't make that birdhouse. I'm 10 years old, you know, and some 22-year-old made that birdhouse. Looks awesome. Look, the fence is painted, coordinated with the, you know, with the windows on the birdhouse. Like I can't even put the roof on the birdhouse. So I think, you know, there's also some of those kind of issues going on. But anyway.
I love the junk box. Sam, if you had a notepad, you'd be writing down junk box right now, like I just did. She usually takes a lot of notes, but I see a seatbelt on her, so I don't think she's taking notes in a second.
No notes right now. Yeah, please, no notes, no notes.
I did that as a training thing one time. I just threw out random materials and said, create an art project to do. And all ages love the junk box. Because,
yeah.
you know,
how could you not like the junk box?
Yeah.
But that's so campy. And that's like the antithesis of what camps were doing, like, you know, by doing too much. Right. But this is what I want to ask you about, Scott, because it's right on this, which is that camps that were, you could say, doing too much, spending too much, all this kind of things, right? Overstaffed, all this kind of thing, right? We had sort of created a culture, just like parents had done with their kids, where they couldn't be self-directing with the junk box, right? And you know, my staff was very, prior to COVID, right, got to a point where it's just like, oh, Sam, you're going to run the arts and crafts. Tiff, you're going to run pickleball. Scott, you're going to tell us what to do at the special event and all that kind of thing. And they didn't have to think for themselves. Right. And then COVID, it was like, we have to keep you together in a pod, and you're going to have to basically run like a lot of municipal programs run, right? Which is sort of like, you know, we got to make do with what we got. And you know what, Sam, take your kids over to there for the next 45 minutes and figure it out, right? Kind of thing. And I think a lot of camps sort of were like, wow, that's pretty great. And by the way, that's a hell of a lot cheaper than doing rocketry, you know, and all that kind of stuff. But, but I think that it's like a balancing act in that I think a lot of the staff, after like summer 2020, when we were a bunch of freedom fighters, right, and everything was great, right? After that, it was just like they were so compromised mentally, like as far, and their resiliency was so low and all that kind of thing, that putting them in those places was a lot of pressure on them. And all of a sudden they had to be creative and they had to do it and all that kind of stuff. And they're like, why can't we go somewhere where someone else is going to sort of run it? We're just taking care of the kids and all kinds of thing. So it's like it's a balancing act, right?
Yep. And I think it all comes with training, you know, right? Like, how do we load them up with the tools for that 45 minutes? Do they have the tools to take kids and with like whatever, the 3 broke crayons and the flat kickball that we give them or whatever, and say, all right, go do something for 45 minutes. It's like, what have we trained them? What have we given them as far as tools, not as far as things? You know, here's, you know, we're not going to give you the sort of rocketry stuff. We're going to tell you to go over there and have fun for 45 minutes. What kind of tools have we given them? And again, that is that sort of foundational work that I think we can do. You know, one of the training things that I was doing a lot prior to the pandemic, and I think it was a little bit prescient as far as like this conversation is concerned, is I was taking big amounts of time. I mean, for anybody who had hired me, I think, to come to their trainings, they were like, dude, this is way too long. But I was taking like an hour, and I would bring literally toys. I'd bring like a bag of Legos, a thing of Play-Doh. I'd always have them get out big flip chart paper and markers. I had a bunch of different kinds of cards. So like regular playing cards, Uno, Spot It, like that kind of stuff. And I'd just set up little stations and I'd just say, okay, we're going to play. Like there's no point to this, right? We're not going to have some kind of big denouement to this experience. And I'm going to say, well, actually, no, we're just going to play. And it was pretty wild to see how a bunch of young people who are kid people who've been hired to come to camps, like, didn't know how to play at the beginning. Some did. Some were like, oh my God, Legos, and just went right over to the Legos. A lot were like, well, what do you mean?
Yeah.
And can I just get on my phone? And it's like, no, let's not do phones. You know, you can have your phone out if you want to take a picture of the thing that you just made out of Lego, sure. But let's play, you know? And I think the end result to that training time was to talk about, well, why did you go to the certain place that you went? And, you know, and it was always, well, my friends were going to go over to the Play-Doh. You know, I just started talking about that.
I think this is full circle. Yeah, this takes us back full circle, right? Because we cannot just think and accept that. Well, I think people get frustrated, right? In that kind of situation. How come they can't just figure it out, right? It's because of how they grew up. People who grown up in the last 10 years did not grow up like the way that we grew up. Even though you're a tweener, you grew up by going outside and playing, right? And that is not how kids are growing up right now. I mean, the ones that are, God bless them, they're the exceptions, right? Most of these people are sitting inside and staring at their screens, right? And that's our workforce now. Okay, these digital natives, okay, to put it nicely. And we literally have to teach them how to play, right? I have a period in all of, you'd be proud to, I'm proud to tell you this, Scott. I have a period at my camp for my entire camp, from the 3-year-olds all the way to 15-year-olds, 45 minutes a day in different times, called free choice. And it is basically free play. And we give them all these different things to do. And when I first presented this and threw it out there, the same exact thing happened, right? And then I said, okay, this is what we're going to do, guys. You're going to play a zone defense. You understand that? Okay. You're going to spread out and play a zone defense. And here's the thing. You can play with the kids, but you can't run anything. Yeah. Okay. That's the rules. All right. And
you
they
gotta
were
play
like,
what they're playing. You can't make the game.
Let them be in charge, but you can't run it. Like you've played Gaga with them and all those kind of and Foursquare or whatever, but they're in charge. Right. And just by giving them those basic rules, they were like, okay, I can do it. Right. Because you can't just tell them, just go play. That's not enough. That's not enough. And that's that back to the basics thing. We got to teach.
So many are waiting for permission. It seemed like the staff didn't feel they could go in the art closet and just grab something, or they're waiting for the next shoe to fall.
Right, because they're so used to there being such concrete rules about everything. You can't touch anything over there because it's not yours. You can't touch anything over there because we're doing the birdhouse. Like everything has been so, and that is maybe what camp evolved into, but I'm hoping that camp can evolve back into a little more freedom.
Yeah, well, and I think sometimes it's about the skills too underneath there, right? Ideas around imagination and around creativity, around, again, sort of not only just unstructured free play, but that ability to be able to look at a group of kids or a kid and follow their lead versus feeling like, well, I'm the adult and you're the kid, so I probably should be the one that says, okay, what are we doing and how are we doing it? And sort of managing the moment. I think so many of those things are skills that again, we've not skipped over. We haven't been ignorant to them, but somehow we've lost that in some of our training to the, well, here's how we run camp and here's how these activities go and here's how the emergency procedures are and here's the policies about whether or not you can be on your phone, and when you're on your phone, here's what you can and can't do. I mean, all those things are important. I'm not saying they're not. I'm just saying that let's put them in the place that they belong.
Let's just pause on that for a second, because you hit on a very good point, and it's a day camp specific point, right? Because when you go out to a sleepaway camp in Wisconsin, and those people are there for a week, right? From the point they wake up to the point they go to sleep, you got all that time to be able to do stuff. But when you were running that thing in Ithaca on the dried up ice hockey rink, right? Yeah. You probably had 12 hours total or something like that. Yeah. For your staff. Yeah. And yet you had to talk about child abuse, and you had to talk about emergency procedures, and you had to talk about what happened when a kid falls and all that kind of stuff, right? When it banged their head, don't pick them up and all these kind of things, right? And what I always say on the Day Camp podcast here is that you have to decide what the priorities are. And I'm not saying that those things don't have to get done, but they can be done quickly. Okay. Yeah. And if you need to teach people how to play and how to, do this kind of stuff, it needs to be a priority. And by the way, you have online learning now. Okay. You can utilize it for that, do all your dry stuff with that, make little videos for that, and then actually play with them when they come to your camp. Right. And one of the things I'm going to put in the show notes is that we've constructed a book called the Fun in the Sun book. And my son was the primary force behind it. And then some other people since then, Taylor, in my camp, we made a version of it for preschoolers, for first and second graders, for third and fourth graders, for fifth and sixth graders, made it like an age specific. And it's all team building games and stuff that you can do with your kids when you have those 15 minutes. And I've seen good counselors doing it with their kids, and it's the highlight of their kids' day.
Yep. 100%. 100%.
You cannot just hand them this book and say, here's good stuff in this book. Good luck.
Yeah.
I also think too, Andy, that we've got to we got to stop thinking about staff training. I might have even mentioned this on the podcast that you were talking about earlier with the Summer Camp Society, but we got to stop thinking about training as sort of one size fits all, right? Like, I understand the time management aspect. Sure, I've run a gazillion trainings, and I understand that you got 100 young people or however big your staff is, and so you can't always just say, well, what do you, Andy, or you, Sam, need, and that's the education I'm gonna try and give you. But I think we can start trying to think about it like, who are you, and what are the things that you need to get you to this level that I kind of want everybody to be at. You're going to need different things than Tiffany's going to need, than I'm going to need. And so can we start to think about how do we meet some of those needs, again, through stuff like, can we get rid of some of the dry stuff and do some online learning and things like that prior to camp? Can we do some smaller groups within our training that are hitting on maybe different kind of topics? Can we do like what you're talking about, Andy, and really talk about like, this is the first and second graders kind of deal, man. They love this kind of stuff. So my folks that are going to be with first and second graders, let's like really get them involved in that. But the fifth and sixth graders staff, they kind of, it's a little bit different, the stuff that we want them to be doing. And it's awesome that you have this resource that you can give them. And the idea should be underscored in there that we're kind of teaching y'all different things. They're related. The principles are the same, but we're teaching you different things for a reason. This is going to help you be a great camp counselor for your kids, and a great camp counselor for each other, So I think that's one of the ways that we might be able to sort of put into practice some of the stuff that we're saying is, how do we think about training maybe in this more individualized kind of way? Can we really think about where people are at and what they might need to get to that level?
Yeah, a really good hack for that is, like once you've done your application and interview and you got the people in, you know who you're going to be, whether they're new, old, returning, or whatever, is to send out a survey or like interest form, for lack of better words. One of the things that I like in corporate that I do with those clients, because there's such a huge thing around disengagement, right? Employees are disengaged, is that like you have to figure out what lights them up. So that I use Jot form, but it'll be like, like it'll start really basic stuff. What's your favorite restaurant? What's your favorite song? What's your favorite movie? And then it goes a little bit deeper, like, oh, okay, kind of like what energizes you? What do you do? Like, what do you hate? You allow them, even with camp, we've done this for a number of years, and when I was married, my husband used to hate it because he's like, it's a job, they should do it. But like, what age do you want to work with? Right? Like asking them what age they want to work with. And then what age don't you want to work with? Why not? Right? Because then you find out like their fears, what they think, well, the 13-year-olds are going to do this, or the 5-year-olds are going to do this. And you're getting into more of the psychology of who they are, what makes them, what they like. And it doesn't mean that they get to go in the group that they chose, but now you know where they feel most lit up. And also, how to help from a professional development perspective, how to help them overcome some of those fears they might have. And then they try it and they're with the 13-year-olds, whatever age, and then they like it and they're just like, oh, I didn't know. But now you have a glimpse to the inside of what they're not going to tell you in the interview, because in the interview they're like, we'll work with any age because they want a job, but once you're in, it's just like, okay, let me ask them all these little things. And then when you see them get into that burnout piece, and you like send them a text message with a playlist with their favorite artist that they told you on this thing that they thought that you forgot, or you throw them the candy bar, they said that it's like the little things that be like, I'm tired and I don't want to deal with these kids and I really want to quit, but he remembered my candy. It's like, it's little, like he remembered that thing about me. And so now it's more of that building that relationship where even if they don't like it or they're tired, they know that you care about them. They're not just a number that you need to get through your summer when they could be doing, a meaningless job. I won't call the other jobs meaningless, but mostly. But, they could be doing something that they might consider easier, but because they know, like, you actually care,
Yeah. I think an interesting way to put that into practice in the middle of your training. So, if you have 3 days of training, or some camps have a whole week of training, or I actually know a camp in Canada that's got 2 weeks of training, and I'm like, what do y'all even do in the 2 weeks? But one of the things that I always did as an outside presenter, but I've done it with my own staff as well, so I know this kind of works as far as being a camp director, is I just pass out index cards in the middle of or at the end of a session. And I just say, hey, anonymous, totally anonymous now. Like write down any questions you got, whether it's about this topic or sort of anything else we covered. Sometimes I've opened it up to kind of anything, but then you get like, you know, camp staff being stupid. But I'd say write down anything you want, any questions that you got. And then we collect them up and absolutely make sure that they're anonymous. Like, you know, kind of say that over and over again. Do not put your name on it, whatever. And what's really interesting is, I mean, most of us do this anyways with our leadership team. We kind of collect up at the end of the day or in the evening maybe, and we say, hey, okay, so how was today? What was going on? What do you think we missed? Like, we got some time tomorrow that we kind of didn't schedule. So what are we going to put in there? So on and so forth. Those index cards have been so valuable because people ask questions in an anonymous way that, you know, they would never raise their hand and be like, I kind of still don't understand homesickness. I thought we were a day camp. Kids don't get homesick at day camp, right? And you're like, oh my God, we really need to talk about this in some other kind of way because we just clearly didn't hit it the way we wanted to hit it in the half an hour we talked about homesickness or whatever the case may be. The point being is that you sort of can collect some of that information around what they're worried about and what they feel like they're missing in that kind of real-time kind of way. Between that and Tiffany, what you're talking about, like I have this feeling that we can start getting closer to meeting the sort of needs that they have and feeling like we're really kind of presenting them with like a great menu of ideas and tools and resources that they can kind of go into camp with. I would even do it. You know, the camp that I run now is only 1 week, and so I've never really had that time to do kind of in-service middle of the summer kind of training. But I would certainly even do it, you know, halfway through the week or into the second week. I'd say, all right.
And I've done that kind of thing with the index cards where I'm like, you cannot leave without writing one question on there.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
make them write a damn question, right? And then I had like a big Utz Pretzels plastic thing, you know, with a slit. And they all stuck it in there. And then like for the rest, you know, for rest of orientation, I'm just pulling them out. You know, like that's how I would end the training. I say, oh, and before we end this training, hey, look at this one. And 1 year it was like, how do we get paid? And I was just like, you know what? That's not even in the damn training. I might as well talk about that. Really good question.
Good question, by the way.
All right. Well, listen, Scott, we're so glad that we pulled you out of your little hermit hole. All right. And listen, we need to bully this man back into the camp industry training circuit again. I am right now putting it out there. ACA National. We need to go to Detroit.
Bring it. Detroit.
So he could drive there.
Right in February is beautiful. Let me tell y'all. Amazing. It's amazing.
Oh my gosh. The Day Camp Podcast is brought to you by CRS, right? Our friends over there, Camptivities, and of course, the Go Camp Pro team. Thank you all for allowing us to bring this podcast to you. If you like what you hear, you should subscribe to the Day Camp Pod on your favorite podcast platform. Check out the show notes from all our episodes at daycamppodcast.com, as well as contact info for the show. For Scott Arizala, it's Scott at thecampcounselor.com.
Yes, sir.
I nailed it. All right. As well as for me and Sam and Tiff, thanks for listening and making yourself a better Day Camp Pro. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of the Day Camp Pod.